Okay, so the recording has started. Good morning to you all. We meet today on Friday, the 24th of April, for an 11 o'clock interaction on a text which we have not been able to do in class, Hazar Churashir Mother of 1084 by Mahadevi, which has been included in the MPhil program in English of Vidyasagar University for the second semester, and it belongs to course number 121, which is on gender studies, and it belongs to unit number 2. Before we begin, I would like to point out to you that the one important thing that we have to keep in mind is that the text Hazar Churashir has been included in the MPhil program in English, course number ENG 121, which deals with gender studies. And because of this, we will make an attempt to look at the novel from the perspective of gender studies. So, in order to do that, the present discussion shall deal with the following issues, and I shall try to cover as much as possible. And if necessary, then I will request you to come back for another interactive session on this text. The first of the issues would be obviously the Naxalite movement. Number two, the upper class society in Kolkata during the 1960s and 1970s. Number three, the representation of this movement in Bengali literature. Number four, the author of the text we wish to study, Mahadevi. The text itself, the novel Hazar Churashir as has been pointed out in the course and not Mother of 1084. And number six, gender studies and Hazar Churashir Now to come back to the first point that we will have to inquire into, and I shall be doing this in great detail because it forms a very vibrant part of the novel and not merely its background. It is the Naxalite movement. You must have seen that I have uploaded substantial learning material in the university website to this extent, and I will borrow certain elements from there over here in order to bring our discussion to a kind of head from where then we can move onward. Charu Majumdar, one of the foremost leaders of this Naxalite movement, the other being Kanu Sannal, he wrote, since there is no direct imperialist occupation in India, revolution will have to advance only along the path of class conflict, that is, through civil war. During this stage of the struggle, no section of the rich class will come to us. After the establishment of worker-peasant unity through a civil war, whom we shall call the national bourgeoisie. This may be found in Unite with the Peasants' Revolutionary Struggle, which he wrote on the 5th of August 1970. Now, as I told you, I shall refer for this discussion on a very important book. The name of the book is In the Wake of Naxalbari, and it has been written by Sumanta Banerjee and published from Kolkata's Sahitya Sanshad in 2008. And it is a work of documentation in which the author has also sometimes engaged himself personally, and I found that there are places where he has intentionally expressed his own views on this movement in that book. And I shall quote from this book quite extensively since it pinpoints certain relevant issues as far as our understanding of Hazar Churashir is concerned. Now for the Naxalbari movement, in brief, it started in 1967, getting its name from the village of Naxalbari in North Bengal, where it got triggered off as a peasants' movement. Later, the CPI Marxist-Leninist program incorporated this united front of the working class and the petty bourgeois, its view when it announced the urban petty bourgeoisie and the revolutionary intellectuals of our country are revolutionary forces and will be a reliable ally in the revolution. Now, we must try and understand what the term petty bourgeoisie means. It is a very important segment of the urban population and in the belongs to the middle and lower middle classes, which comprise mainly teachers, white collar employees, students, etc. Politically, they are the most vociferous and volatile. This segment of society had access to education and employment and therefore was financially quite capable of meeting the daily necessities. So they had access to education, employment, and could thus afford an intellectual life free from the responsibility of production, that is, engagement as labor in industries or as entrepreneurs. So, this segment grew into a hybrid class, blending in themselves both modern and medieval characteristics. Some of them being descendants of the old zamindars or banias, brokers in European business firms, who were also sometimes termed the compradors, which is actually a Chinese term borrowed by Mao Zedong, who made money through connections with the British traders, inherited the worst features of their predecessors, cold pursuit of self-interest and rank opportunism, and hungered for their lost economic and social status. In our novel, Sujata's family, excepting Sujata and Broti, subscribe to this group. But at the same time, the intelligentsia of this class was inspired by contemporary European ideas of liberalism and democracy and were often affected by the degrading poverty that surrounded them. To this section of the same class would belong Sujata and Broti. This explained their radicalism, which occasionally took the form of furious outbursts at the slightest encroachment on their rights and privileges and spurts of individualism. Now, this class played an important role in the political struggles during the British rule, and its strength and weaknesses influenced the course of the national movement. Many of these people later turned to communism, and it was no wonder, therefore, that the intelligentsia, teachers, lawyers, journalists, professional politicians, and students came to provide the Communist Party of India, Marxist Leninist movement with the leadership and became its main ideologues. In spite of the occasional betrayal of wrong ideas, again inherited from their class background, they set examples of supreme self sacrifice, as can be seen in the case of Broti and his comrades. In marked contrast with the parliamentary leftist leaders, to be precise, the CPIM, among others, whose activities were a routine of revolutionary phrase mongering from a safe distance, followed by ruthless self seeking through every available avenue in the existing system. As opposed to this, the CPIML leaders of petty bourgeois origin left their homes and gave up their careers in a bid to declass themselves and become professional revolutionaries, voluntarily sacrificing the comforts of their old environment, the social position in a bourgeois world, rejecting all the benefits that were available to those who conformed to the legal system. They chose to become one with the deprived millions of India and join their struggle to change the system. This is the type to which both Broti subscribes. But it was not merely their integration with the peasantry, but their belief in the cause, which was firm enough to make them see it through, whatever the danger to their personal well being, comfort, and safety, that set them apart from the other political leaders of the contemporary times who belonged to other different political parties. They were brave men, ennobled by something greater than themselves. They were the only political leaders in the country who were hounded by a brutal police force, who remained behind bars for years without trial, suffering inhuman, sadistic tortures. They were killed in the obscurity of the deserted night streets of Calcutta or some gloomy police interrogation cell. Their names were banished from newspaper headlines, reference to the text. A conspiracy of silence was built around them, the family of Broti. Here was a party which was, in the real sense of the term, a party of martyrs. Curiously enough, all through 1970 and 1971, a phase, these 2 years during which the height of the youth upsurge could be seen, not a single of those upper class expensive schools that adorned the fashionable lanes behind Park Street, Lower Circular Road, or Theatre Road were attacked. To be specific, you have Calcutta, uh, St. Xavier's School, St. Xavier's College, Loreto House, Loreto School in Loreto House, Loreto College out there, among others, who were all missionary run. These were not attacked. Yet, the alumni of these institutions belonged to that class which was accustomed to looking down upon the masses of workers and peasants, and to respect everything concerning the power structures and become lackeys or agents of these power structures. Again, the reference to Sujata's family would be very pertinent. She herself was a student of Loreto education. Sujata studied in one such school, Loreto Convent. But it was the politically committed core among the urban revolutionaries, the band of dedicated CPIML activists, who became the source of a stirring communist legend. It was their bloodshed and heroism in the numerous battles fought in Calcutta and the suburbs in 1970-71 that gave the movement its revolutionary aura, a kind of romantic aura developed out of this very real life movement. The halo of martyrdom which surrounded them made their names household words in their localities and inspired the next generation of revolutionaries. They were absorbed by the one exclusive interest, the one thought, the one single passion, which was the revolution, which they seriously believed could be unleashed by paralyzing the administration and terrorizing the rulers through a series of annihilations. This was one of the flaws in the movement, but it was inevitable. They were not common criminals, which the police tried to make them out, but dreamers with a violent mission. As Shumanta Banerjee writes, they were characters whom Dostoevsky would have been proud to have created. But shooting people dead without trial was quite common in West Bengal all through 1971. The Indian police was one up in straightaway shooting down CPIML prisoners in the jails of West Bengal. The West Bengal police set the precedent by arresting yet another foremost leader, Saroj Dotto, on the midnight of the 4th and 5th of August 1971. The dates are alternative because the time is uncertain. It could be before or after 12 uh, uh, during that night. and killing him the same night in a dark corner of the Calcutta Maidan. I would digress slightly here and refer to that one film which most of us have seen, I believe, Bhuter Bhovishyat, in which that role played by Shobboshachi Babu is reminiscent of this character of Saroj Dutt. Um, just a second. Brothi's life and death have much in common with the documentation in the wake of Naxalbari by Shumanta Banerjee, and therefore I have used the text as an important reference material uh, for our study of Mahashweta Devi's novel. Yet another documentation of a different nature is one to which I would draw your attention is the following very graphic documentation by Professor Bashobi Fraser, Professor Emerita, Department of English, Edinburgh Napier University, Scotland, which I have borrowed from her blog. She writes in over there, the sense of loss and disillusion gripped the state as a land reform movement that began in North Bengal near a small town called Naxalbari, which lit Kolkata in the late 60s and early 70s in a conflagration of Marxist-Leninist violence that wanted to shake the foundations of what it saw as a corrupt, decadent, dysfunctional bourgeoisie system that needed to be swept away by a revolution. The coffee houses of Kolkata, she was a student at that time, the nexus of its many student revolutions, transformed from the storm in the coffee cup to storms of actual confrontation between students and police in barricades and pitched battles, which left College Street, the street of bookshops, of Calcutta University's Ashutosh campus, Presidency and Sanskrit colleges and Hindu school, a battleground between the dreaming young, the disaffected populace, and the establishment. The hit lists, which were drawn up by a section of the Naxalites, targeting people in key positions who were seen as enemies of the people, led to murders and counter murders, turning the tide of public support against the Naxalites. This is what Professor Fraser documents very truly. The Naxalite movement caught the city in a violence that made it dangerous for youth to stay in their homes for fear of arrest, and the death of suspected Naxalites in police custody, the vanishing of those captured, both men and women, the settling of old scores by various factions under cover of the Naxalite movement, the relentless measures taken by the Indira Gandhi government, making inroads into the group to splinter it from within as we find in Hazar Churashir with the help of the then state government, amounted to a good section of Kolkata's and Bengal's aspiring intellectual youth being wiped out altogether. These two sources have been referred to in order to bring to you a microcosmic representation of the political, social, and cultural scenario in West Bengal in general, and Calcutta in particular, during the late 1960s, to be specific, from 1967 onwards, and early 1970s, more or less up to 1971-72, at most 1973, in documented narratives of this nature. There are many more, but I think we should get back to the second of the issues that we wish to deal with over here, the upper class society in Kolkata during the 1960s and 70s, the class to which Brothi's family belonged. Again, from Professor Bashobi Fraser's blog, she writes, so Kolkata, the city of Adda, that untranslatable Bengali malady, obsession, culture, lifeline, call it what you will, that serious light, intellectual conversation, discussion, debate about politics, football, newspaper articles, football and cricket matches, theatre, film, war, anything where young men gather in tea stalls, in coffee houses, on the rocks to solve the world's problem, as it were, through Adda, was suddenly transformed during the Naxalite days. Roads were uncannily empty, and instead of young men commenting on and teasing passing girls, there was a city of young men in hiding. Yes, what was missing was the presence of carefree youngsters. We became alert to furtive football, running feet, someone knifed in broad daylight, Sten gun shots ripping still afternoons and silent evenings, blood spilling over tram lines, and those old French window shutters closing quickly over silent streets, afraid of being called on as witnesses. It was not till the mid 70s that Kolkata was able to bounce back to its bustling activity with its amazing resilience and resume its claim to fame as the city of processions. And agitational politics took on a different turn as a Marxist government came to power in 1977. And being Marxist did not identify this government with the Naxalites, whom they did not tolerate and whom they made every effort to eliminate in every possible way. Professor Fraser goes on to speak about the social status. In Kolkata, only the rich had cars in the 60s, and the most popular one remained the ambassador for a long time. I shall digress. I just cannot resist this. My home is on one side of the railway tracks between Howrah and Pandil, and on the other side, towards the north, we have, I'm sorry, not the north, the west of our home, we have the Hind Motor Factory, which used to manufacture ambassadors. But the factory is closed and is dwindling into history gradually. So, to get back to Professor Fraser's quote, in the 70s and 80s, though private cars seemed to be in abundance on Kolkata streets, they were not owned by the general middle class. So that was the scenario. People could afford a good life, but they did not live in luxury. So Professor Fraser says, Kolkata is everyone's city, loath to clear its pavements of pavement dwellers, its slums sitting side by side, gated multi-story buildings, and refugees and economic migrants still drawn to its overburdened infrastructure. And now we understand what happens when a city's population is always on the spill because the threat of the COVID 19 is really terrifying in such a situation. It is a city of contrasts, says Professor Fraser, with its millions of workers, its teeming middle class, and entrepreneurial rich. So, one more aspect of the Kolkata life to which Dibbonath and his son Jyoti subscribed was, particularly in the 1960s and 70s, the nightlife culture of Calcutta, which was an integral part of a sophisticated lifestyle of the elite and the rich. Park Street was the most active place where parties continued into very late hours. And even today, we have certain restaurants and bars where there is plenty of opportunity for entertainment and leisure and pleasure. Now, a word on the Calcutta Police Force. The role of the Calcutta Police Force in the entire course of events has been unprecedented during the Naxalite period, even in comparison to the behavior of the police during the British Raj in its brutality and cold-blooded perpetration of terror. If you are interested in more information, you can visit Jay's store and you have an essay out there, Through the Eyes of the Police, Naxalites in Calcutta in the 1970s. Therefore, we find that Calcutta in the late 1960s and the early 1970s was the site for a variety of happenings on different levels which were definitely not separated from each other. Mahashweta Devi has brought a number of these major aspects of this particular time span into the ambit of Hazar Churashir Ma. Therefore, we move to the third segment of this discussion, the representation of this movement in Bengali literature. There is plenty, directly and indirectly. I have not referred to films and more of theatre because that would lengthen the list. But I have chosen some of the more popular and famous. The first is a 1967, just note the dates, play by Utpal Datta, a play to which he has not referred afterwards. A play about which, if you speak to scholars of Utpal Datta, even they will be surprised that you have information about the existence of this play. The name of the play is Tir, and it was first performed in Minerva Theatre on the 16th of December 1967. Dutt himself played the character of Birsa Orang, and he was arrested on charges of being a Naxalite on the 24th of December in the same year, and he had to make a lot of compromises in order to get a release. And thereafter, he subscribed to the CPIM ideology, for which many of his critics have been truly critical about him, for becoming very self centered and for compromising in his political ideas. Next, we have, so this was in 1967 when the movement just was getting into a kind of spearhead. The other, Hazar Churashir Ma, the very next significant one, by Mahashweta Devi, is immediately after this movement has been curbed. So Hazar Churashir Ma occupies a very significant place even in the history of the documentation in any form, either real life documentation or fictional documentation of the Naxalite movement. So you have Hazar Churashir Ma in 1974. Somoresh Mojumdar wrote a trilogy, the first of which, Kalbala, is written in 1981 and again focuses on the Naxalite movement and what happened to the young men who were engaged in it and what happened to the young women who were engaged in it. The next important one to which I would draw your attention is by Somoresh Boshu, a novel written in 1988 called Shekol Chhena Hater Khoje. It has also been adapted for theatre by Tirthankar Chando for the theatre group Rongolok. And a very recent one, Mach Master by Sharup Dotto, which can be broadly divided into two sections, the first of which is directly related to the Naxalite movement. So these are the few texts to which I would draw your attention. If you have time, then you can find them and read them. You will not be disappointed. Now for the fourth section of this discussion. The author, Mahashweta Devi, born 14th January 1926. She left us on the 28th of July 2016, nearly 4 years ago. She was a fiction writer, writing in Bengali, and a socio-political activist. Let me digress here. She wrote in Bengali. We know about her family background. Her father, Monish Ghatak, her uncle, Ritik Ghatak, her husband, Bijan Bhattacharjee, her son, who is another great author, and she began her early life as an employee in the Indian Posts and Telegraphs Service. She had worked in the Calcutta GPO for quite some time. Then she became a teacher, a college teacher, teaching in Bijoygarh College for a very long time. And during her travels from the college by rickshaw, she came into contact with the rickshaw puller, who is today one of the foremost Dalit Bengali authors, Monoranjan Bapari. She discovered Monoranjan Bapari and his interest in literature and coaxed him to write his own narrative. Therefore, Mahashweta Devi's engagement with the Dalits and Adivasis is okay. Devabroto wants admission, so let us admit him. Here he is. Devabroto, are you there? Okay, I think he is there. Uh, so, her engagement with the Adivasis and Dalits is actually a very personal engagement. There is nothing to show off. And for this, she had made many sacrifices, including leaving her son, who was very small, with her husband and just walking out of her home because she wanted to travel to remote parts of India. And she traveled across the Adivasi inhabited areas to gain information and knowledge about them. So she led a life which was one of difficulty. She was not a Naxalite per se. No, she wasn't. But she knew what they were doing. And as far as possible, she may even be a sympathizer with them. So she traveled extensively as a social activist across the Adivasi inhabited areas of Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal during the 1950s and 60s, interacting with them in order to know them better. As a result, she got acquainted with the deprivation and marginalization that these people had been subjected to. And she found that there were the different Adivasi or tribal communities inhabiting the regions she had visited. And among them were the Shabors, the most deprived of a decent lifestyle, owing to a variety of reasons. One of the chief reasons was that because the Shabors were very brave and had started rising up like the Mundas against the British. Mahashweta Devi was also very fond of the Mundas, about whom she writes in Aranyer Adhikar. She writes about Birsa Munda. She writes in Draupadi about another Mundari couple. So she wrote quite a lot about the Mundari people. Here, she found that the Shabors, like the Mundas, were pinpointed by the British as possible dangers as far as their complacent existence in India was concerned. And therefore, like many other tribes in other parts of India, the Shabors were designated as criminal tribes by the British. And this stigma continued very late into independent India. It is very strange. Until they were denotified much later, but their position or their social stigma still continues. And this is what pained Mahashweta Devi. So, among the three major subsects of the Shabors, the Lodha, Keria, and Dut Shabors, the first two can be found primarily in the western districts of uh, Bengal, of West Bengal. So, Mahashweta Devi decided to dedicate her social welfare activities to these two Shabor communities, the Lodha and the Keria Shabors. She became an intrinsic part of the Paschim Bongo Keria Shabor Kollan Samiti, which has its headquarters in Rajnoagor in the Purulia district, putting in her best efforts for the social upliftment of these Adivasi people. Now, if you are wondering why I am saying all this here, that is because our university, headed by our Honorable Vice Chancellor, is associated with this organization academically through the departments of English, Bengali, Anthropology, and the Center for Adivasi Studies. So, this is why I have mentioned Mosheta Devi's connection directly and indirectly with our university. So her social activities have brought her very close to us, and her inclusion in our MPhil course has brought her even closer to the Department of English. Now let us proceed. Uh, Among her literary works could be mentioned first one, Jhansi Rani, 1956, which is a rereading of the Queen of Jhansi from a feminist, very modern perspective, how she is relevant even today. The next, of course, is Hazar Churashir. The third one, which I felt would be important for you, is Oronner Odhikar, written in 1979, in which you have the reference to Birsa Munda. And you have a collection of short stories in 1980 called Chotti Munda Ebong Tar Tir. There are numerous others, obviously, to which we shall not refer here. Now, she has been recognized both for her literary as well as social welfare activities by way of various awards, which include and are not only confined to the Sahitya Academy Award, the Bharatiya Gyanpith Award, the Raman Magsaysay Award, the Padma Shri, and the Padma Vibhushan. Now to get to the novel Hazar Churashir Ma. Mohashita Devi wrote this unique novel with the background of the Naxalite movement, which had been brutally curbed by the Calcutta police force when she wrote the novel, which was first published, as I told you, in 1974. Although she writes mostly about Adivasi life, that is why I referred so much in detail to her Adivasi related activities. She writes mostly about the Adivasis. This singular work of fiction upholds the social, cultural, and even the familial lives of the different significant social strata among the Bengalis living in Calcutta during that time. Elements of in the novel which we must keep in mind would include but would not be confined to the socio-cultural and political elements in it, the plot, the narrative technique, the absentee character of Broti. Obviously, because this is a gender studies paper, we will have to look at it from the feminist perspective of the position of women in the novel. So, Sujata Chatterjee, the protagonist, and the other women characters. So, we will gradually round up to these. The socio-cultural and political elements we have already discussed in detail. So we'll have to keep in mind the Naxalite movement, what happened there, the three sections of society which feature very prominent in the novel, the upper class, the elites represented by Sujata's family, the middle class represented by Nandini and her background. Nandini is the girlfriend of Broti, and the most deprived section, who are people who have come over from the other side of partitioned Bengal to settle in colonies and slums. That is Shomu and his background. So these were the three important sections of the Bengalis living in Kolkata, and very wisely Mahashweta Devi has involved all these three sections in her novel, and the women in these three sections feature very prominently here. Now, to come to the plot, I will just mention in passing that the plot is a very complex one, it is not unilinear because the subject, the theme itself demands that the plot be complex. The narrative technique is also not very straightforward. You have a lot of authorial interventions. There is dialogue. There are plenty of retrospective arrivals in the process of unfolding of the narrative. And of course, there is the present. So, Sujata's past, her present, the dialogue, the memories are all brought together in the form of a collage in a shifting movement, which also therefore depict the restlessness in Sujata's mind and the restlessness in her family, which is trying its level best to pretend that there is some sort of an equilibrium even after 2 years following that fatal event of Brothi's death on his birthday on the 17th of January. He died in the wee hours of the night on his birthday, and it is very interesting that the engagement of the youngest sister is also slotted on that particular date. The question is, does the family wish to pretend that Broti is not important for them? Or is the family trying to erase anything to do with Broti? That is the question that is raised by Mahashweta Devi through the character of Sujata Chatterjee. Now, a quick reference to the absentee character of Broti, because although he does not figure in the novel as a living character, he is very much there because it is Broti who is being rediscovered by his mother in the process of her going back to his memories, what he said, what he did, how he behaved. And she also gets to realize that in spite of her weakness for him, in spite of her soft corner from him, for him, among the 4 children that she had, she knows Broti very little for the real person that he actually was. He always kept one part of himself away from her. And for as long as he lived, Sujata felt that she was very caring towards him. He needed her to look after him. But now she realizes that he was so matured that it was he who was looking after his mother like a very responsible young man, something which her husband did not do, something which her other son Jyoti did not do, something which her daughters did not do. So, this creates a very different kind of bonding between the absent son and the mother in this novel. We don't know. There is every chance that Mahashweta Devi maybe had similar feelings for her son because she had left him when she had ventured out in quest of getting to know more about the world of the Adivasis. So, Broti, although dead, is a living factor in the way the threads of the story of the novel are woven to provide a coherence to the narrative. The other men of Sujata's family, her husband Dibbonath, Jyoti, and the people with whom they interact, they are upper strata. They are very close to the police officers, the administration, the newspaper owners, so they can manipulate information. They can manipulate a lot of things to do with Broti. They can afford to keep Broti away from their apparently normal, calm, undisturbed existence, something which is commented upon by Nondini and even Somu's family in the course of the novel. To them, Broti is a nightmare to the men in his family, his father, his dada, that forces its way into their sweet dream of a cozy affluence without the stench of wrong associations with the politically erring sections of Calcutta in the 1960s and 70s. Uh, I think I will stop there for today, and in our next meeting, then we will look at the last two sections, Sujata, the protagonist, and the other women characters in the novel. So I'll stop there for now, and I would request you to unmute your microphones and have a discussion. Since this is an MPhil interaction, it would be good if we could all have a kind of discussion. So please, uh, if you have anything to say, you have anything to say?
What was Mahashada Devi's take on the populist leftist movement of Calcutta?
She definitely did not subscribe to the CPIM affairs. I don't know. See, now the ideology of the CPIM is one thing, but the ideology was used in Banglaয় যাকে আমরা বলি শিখণ্ডী by many self-interested individuals who made a farce of it, and we know what happened to it in the 34 years of its existence as the ruling political party. And Mahashweta Devi did not approve of what the CPIM did. But as far as the Naxalites are concerned, obviously she is more sympathetic towards them, although she was not personally engaged with them. Anything else? Is Debobroto here?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Debobroto is here? Yes, he is
Yes,
here.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, have you got anything to say?
No, I've been trying for long, but couldn't connect.
Okay, now you've managed.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I always keep an eye to see whether someone is waiting in the lobby to get admitted, and suddenly I discovered you were waiting. I'm sorry, I must have missed you, but at the moment I saw that you were waiting, I admitted you. Any other
Thank you.
Ma'am,
questions? Sindhura?
ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, can we relate Hazar Churashir Ma with the breast stories of Mahashweta Devi?
In a way, yes, because
Because Draupadi was there, and even the fate of Yashoda, that can also be considered as the fate of. She was an upper class Brahmin, but she too was a suburb.
yes. So here I think you could relate the breast stories with Hazar Churashir Ma in a way in which, of course, the moment you mention the title breast stories, it implies that you are referring to motherhood and womanhood, the two combined
Yes.
together, particularly womanhood. And as we all know that uh, the breasts are the source of life for the young baby of the mother, as well as they are signifiers of womanhood which call for security and protection and are always on the verge of being disturbed, or I should say, of being there are gender issues related to a woman's breasts. So they are signifiers of womanhood first, and second, motherhood. So when Sujata is concerned, she is both a woman and a mother who has given birth to four children. And then she has her daughter in law, she has her son in law, she has her grandchild. So, as a woman, she is supposed to be fulfilled, and yet there is a great void in her existence as a woman. She has everything, but she doesn't have everything as would indicate the fulfillment of womanhood. And the breast stories also show how that in spite of being women, in spite of having the capacity for procreation, these women are disturbed, they are tampered with, they are tortured, they are brutalized, they are shown very little or no respect from time to time by various different sections of society. So, the women in Mahashweta Devi's narratives could be correlated, definitely.
Ma'am, can we also correlate Nandini with Draupadi because of the police torture they both undergo?
Uh, yes, of course you can,
As a
but
signifier of the systematic, oppression of a
perpetration of
particular
torture
gender.
upon women as the weaker sex who will not be able to protect themselves. And the torture that is perpetrated to women is always different from that which is perpetrated to men. And the tortures by the police, which they usually call the third degree, is also very gender specific. So, Nandini is implying what had been done to her, and Draupadi, what is done to her, is obviously narrated in graphic detail. Draupadi has been written a bit later, so Mahashweta Devi's dissatisfaction with society had been even more sharpened, and she did not see any reason why she should hide what the police were actually doing. Because by virtue of being with the Adivasis for a very long time, she knew exactly what kind of behavior was meted out to them. Because when they wanted to protest against the kind of police violence that was meted out to them, there would be no one to pay attention to them, not even the media. And by way of digression, I can say that I have a presentation ready on five Adivasi women who have not been able to get what they deserve, what has been uh, promised to us by the Indian Constitution, the Honorable Constitution of India, by way of our fundamental rights. How these women have been deprived of these things. These are the things which actually disturb Mahashweta Devi. So that is also there. You are absolutely correct in this matter.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, ma'am.
Hello?
No, ma'am, nothing else.
Any other question? Okay, then. Should we?
Ma'am, ma'am,
Yes.
hello. Earlier you said that Mahashweta Devi was sympathetic towards the Nakshals. So, what was her take? What was her take on the violent notions which were taken by the Nakshals? Because she was sympathetic because of the violence perpetrated upon them by the police force, by the government. What was her take on the violent notions uh,
Violence perpetrated by
of
them.
the?
It was because she did not support them that she did not go with them properly. Because she
I
did not
didn't
support
get.
this violence that they perpetrated, she did not subscribe to their movement in a very active manner. You get my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, since she was affiliated to Naxalbari movement, like with the Naxalite, and what we see is that eventually the Maoist inclinations, which is found in Chhattisgarh or MP, and since she was also affiliated to the tribal communities and their issues that we see in ordinary Rohingya, so what was her take uh, on the Maoist issue?
Okay. She is not interested in the Maoist issues because by the time the Maoist issue that we see today, that is a resurgence of the Naxalite movement in a different manner, and this had actually begun not in West Bengal but in Chhattisgarh and Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra, and West Bengal is now a fringe of that movement. It is no longer the center. This is the second phase of that movement, you can say. Mahashweta Devi was not interested in this any longer. Her more interest, her greater interest and focus was on the provision of basic amenities, which included housing, health, livelihood, and education for the Kheria Shabors, who are all members of the Paschim Bongo Kheria Shabor Kollan Samiti. That was her primary focus. Along with them, the Lodha Shabors, who also have an organization of their own. And Mr. Prahlad Kumar Bhakta is one of the foremost Lodha Shabors, along with others who are engaged in a similar activity related to the Lodha Shabors. So Mahashweta Devi later on focused her complete attention to these basic issues related to the Kedia Shabors and the Lodha Shabors. The Maoist insurgency and the Maoist activities would not come within the ambit of her concern. All right. Anything else? Okay then. I hope I shall be able to meet you next Friday. In case there is any change, I'll have to see, because I have classes with different groups, and you know we have data related issues. So if I'm free on Friday, then we meet same day, same time. And if I have any problem, then I will get back to you and inform you about the change in schedule and see whether you will also be free, and then we can fix up a meeting. All right. Everybody is here excepting Rofikul. So I will make a post in the WhatsApp group, and I think that should be enough for all of you. All right.
Ma'am,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, given the current situation, would we follow the same exam format that we had in semester 1?